So when this outgoing government took over and tried to bring the IMF program back on track, there are a few requirements which the IMF calls the prior actions. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. Otherwise, you are not even going to organize a board meeting to discuss Ghana and, disperse, any funds to you. And guess what? One of the prior actions was to resolve UT and Capital Bank. The Ghanaians had never, or they hadn't seen that in a long period of time. So, obviously, people were shocked when the licenses of those two banks were, pulled.
Now, one of the first group of people and organizations who congratulated John Dramani Mahama after the just ended December 7th election was the International Monetary Fund, known as the IMF. Now, you will be shocked. Say, why would the IMF congratulate John Dramani Mahama? Immediately, they congratulated John Dramani Mahama and I'm sending a message. Say, John Dramani Mahama, we have money for you. You will scour why so scan all your money scanner just come and take. And surprisingly, John Dramani Mahama said something. Say, IMF, thank you so much. But before I will come to you guys for money, or before I take the money that you guys are giving me, then we have to do some renegotiation. Mahama Sansemna Mahama Kayeno ne ekwa kosi bibi so. Because today, in a video ekwa kwashe, Dr. Ernest Addison, the governor of the Bank of Ghana, over the weekend, event because so, as you are seeing the flyer on the screen, this particular event, a governance day, it happened at the University of Professional Studies (UPS) just this 21st of December 2024. Now, on that particular event, and in that particular event, Dr. Ernest Addison was billed to speak. And what in some quote to just say, Ghana for banks ni yegu no enye ye pe o IMF for and the catches yengu banks no ewo Ghana. Listen, you watch a video so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Obe kai say ebra IMF edi message no koma John Dramani Mahama say Mahama we ni bejiska Mahama send message e koma IMF. You want to screen so you and go video no say. This is coming from Reuters, okay? I brought four or more websites, Reuters, news organizations. I say Ghana will not quit IMF deal, but wants changes. President-elect. Inti Mahama says, see, IMF, you want to give us money, but then we want changes. Changes now here can say, don't tell us how to run our economy. You don't tell us what to do. Quick one. Shall I say, I'll say Mahama vows to Osha Asia say na a bullet now. Or say Mahama vows to review IMF deal after taking office on January 7th. Review will focus on energy sector reining in expenditure. Mahama won December 7th election on a wide margin. So Mahama is telling IMF, say IMF, we will take the money. Or if we come, we need to go back to the drawing board and you don't tell us what to do. Yankoshe video nearby. There is a different angle, so obey ye yeba yebeto aso.
Sure that there was an asset quality review exercise to assess the portfolio of banks. And in addition to that, if you would recall, we also had the Act 930, which was promulgated around that time to strengthen Bank of Ghana's ability to supervise and resolve banks. The resolution regime for banks was set up in the Act 930. I'm sure those who were working on that act did not know what they were doing, right? But they were setting the stage for Bank of Ghana to be able to be stronger in terms of its ability to supervise and regulate the banks and have an effective resolution regime. So when I came in 2017, all of the homework had been done under that IMF program. In fact, I remember the first meeting I had sometime in probably April 2017, when the mission chief, this Italian lady, walks into my office and comes to give me a short brief on their assessments of the economy. Mr. Governor, welcome to the seat. You have inherited some good things and some not so very good things. And among a list of the not so very good things was the banking sector. There were a lot of banks that had, toxic assets, very weak corporate governance, and this is the problem that I have to resolve. And you have to resolve these issues as quickly as possible. The banks that had been flagged at that time had to come up with capital restoration programs. And not many people know that as of that time, 2 banks had already been flagged as insolvent, completely insolvent. There was really, nothing that could be done about them. We had given them all the opportunity to find additional capital. One of the offers that we got actually meant that the government would have to pay the investor in order to take over the bank. That tells you the state in which that bank was. So when this outgoing government took over and tried to bring the IMF program back on track, there are a few requirements which the IMF calls the prior actions. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. Otherwise, you are not even going to organize a board meeting to discuss Ghana and, disperse, any funds to you. And guess what? One of the prior actions was to resolve UT and Capital Bank. The Ghanaians had never, or they hadn't seen that in a long period of time. So, obviously, people were shocked when the licenses of those 2 banks were, pulled. I remember the bankers' dinner that year, because there were quite a few other banks who were also sort of borderline cases. You could hear a pin drop in the room and the tension. But some of you who are here, I'm sure will recollect those days. So we've come a long way, trying to clean up the system of weak and insolvent banks, sort of bringing in new capital requirements to strengthen the banks, and really having banks that are strong enough to be able to effectively carry out financial intermediation to support growth. And really this is what we did between the period 2017 to 2019. I must say that I was blessed to have 2 very competent deputies. Dr. Maxwell Afari deserves a hand. Very strong and well known for his skills. And Madame Elsie Awadzi. These have been my very strong, able deputies who have supported me. I don't want to do a farewell speech tonight, but at the appropriate time, we would do that. So that was really the beginning, cleaning up the bank, setting up all these new corporate governance issues. The problems were many. The banks were undercapitalized, they needed to recapitalize. The disrespect for the rules of corporate governance, all these related party transactions, the insider dealings that went on. These are all documented, they're published. In fact, they are on the website of the bank, so those who want to go and read, the information is there. It's interesting to see some of these people dancing because of the recent events, but I'm not sure what all of that means for them. But as I said, I'm not going to go into So we will get to some of these things on another date. So yours is on?
Okay. So thank you, Governor. That's quite a journey through memory lane in terms of the conditions that prevailed at the time that you became Governor of Bank of Ghana. So there must be some global context to that. You described the local conditions. Fast forward where we are today, what's the state of resilience in the sector? But even more importantly, how do we sustain that?
Well, so it's good that you going back to the global conditions, because given where I left off in 2019, we had, not knowing that the following year, in 2020, we are going to have these external shocks coming in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I'm not one of those who would want to blame the developments in Ghana only on the external factors. Yes, there were domestic vulnerabilities. The Bank of Ghana has been very consistent in our assessment of the direction of fiscal policy throughout 2019. But the vulnerabilities were there. And then, unfortunately for us, the global shocks also came in terms of this pandemic, and then in terms of what happened to the Russia-Ukraine. And the fiscal policy response to these shocks was, again, very expansionary fiscal policies, which only aggravated the vulnerabilities that we had in place. All of that panned out into another macroeconomic crisis. Ghana lost access to the international capital markets at a time that debt sustainability was an issue. So if you have reached the point where you are borrowing externally to pay debt, both internal and domestic, and suddenly you can't access that external borrowing when that line is plugged, you are finished. And really, this is what happened very early in 2022. The government needed to continue to service its debts, both internally and externally, and they didn't have the resources to do it. So this is where the crisis started. And as usual, when there is a crisis, it goes through the economy, exchange rates, get unhinged, interest rates goes up, rear the economy suffers, and then it spills over into the financial sector. In this particular case, because we had asked banks to recapitalize at the end of 2019, the banks, almost all the banks had resources, right? Now, instead of redirecting these resources to finance the real economy, going into 2020, they only bought government bonds. So you get that sovereign risk exposure in the books of the banks. So when all that the banks are doing is to investing in government bonds instead of lending, and then the government goes into the crisis, then the banks again were in trouble, with the DDEP. So we are right back to that whole fiscal, macro, and how it interacts with the banking and, SDI sectors. We found a lot of banks that were exposed to both the domestic and external debt, and have had to impair their books, and again have had to recapitalize again. Fortunately for us, after 2022, we could see that in 2023, a lot of the banks seem to have recovered somewhat from the impact of the DDEP. And this is where we are. This year, the data that we have seen suggests that the banks are, doing very well. Asset growth of about 40%. The credit growth is recovering around 28-29%. The profitability of banks are strong. They have almost 8-point-something billion in profits on a year-to-date basis. And I think banks are also liquid. So yet again, you find that the banking system is recovering from another economic-driven crisis. But we believe that they have adequate buffers, in terms of the way forward and looking ahead. And the banks are in a stronger position to manage the risks that they face in the near future.
So thank you, Governor. First of all, let me seize the opportunity and congratulate you on the Bank Square project. I think that has redefined the skylines of Ghana for sure. But I'm also hearing that there are externalities, and then there are the domestics and the vulnerabilities that we face. And then you touch on the business models of banks in terms of their sovereign exposures as well, which is quite interesting. I'm sure the MDs and the executives in banks will pay attention to that. I'm sure that's what informed some of the measures that we've seen recently in terms of lending to the real economy and not just getting exposed to government. Just moving forward, and I ask because Chartered Institute of Bankers Ghana mandate, and if you look at this year's theme, is really resilience in the financial system, navigating horizon risks. What are the horizon risks? If you look at prospective, what are the things that we must do as an industry to remain sustainable?
This concept of horizon risks, the horizon is really very far away. I think these risks are just lurking around the corner, and we want to deal with them, almost as soon as possible. Let me start with the issue of all this disinformation and misinformation issue, which has taken a big role in our lives in Ghana these days. It's an issue which bothers me a lot, because we at the Bank of Ghana have suffered quite a bit from the misinformation and disinformation that has happened in the last few years. I mean, fancy somebody sitting on TV and saying that, the Bank of Ghana has printed 60 billion cedis. And people actually believe that. I mean, this is the sort of disinformation that goes on. They don't even understand how to read the bank statement, because they are referring to the domestic debt impact on the Bank of Ghana's balance sheet, which are really coming out of the impairments of holding government bonds in our books. People interpret that as Bank of Ghana illegally printed money. I mean, how can a central bank legally print money? It is the central bank money which is legal. Legal tender in this country is issued by the central bank. Central bank money can never be legal unless you are referring to counterfeit. Counterfeit money is illegal, but central bank money that the central bank has printed, is legal tender. So that whole concept, for me, is almost annoying. But having said that, I mean, this issue of information age and the challenges that it brings to all of us, I think is an area to watch. The issue of, digital finance and digitization of financial services and the challenges that come with it. You look at the issues of data privacy, that's something that you need to look at. You look at the issue of the cybersecurity challenges that we face. Recently, we heard about the Bank of Uganda, where they have had a cyber attack and the central bank had lost money. That sort of thing, you know, for me, becomes an issue that banks need to focus on. But they are not cheap. I mean, when I looked at the resources that we had to invest, you know, in our Financial Industry Command Security Operations Center, the FICSOC, which all of you are making use of. These things are very expensive equipment. You even look at the data center, the conditions under which these servers have to be maintained in such a hot climate, and you need to have all these machines being cooled at a certain temperature. It costs a lot of money to be able to have this modern equipment and undertaking all the cyber surveillance that we are doing. But until that attack comes, you underestimate the importance of the work that you're doing. And I think banks need to invest in ensuring that they have resilience against some of these, you know, cyber risks. Another major area, you know, is the issue of climate risk, which is very topical. You know, we have an agricultural-based economy. I mean, the cocoa sector is one of the biggest sectors that is supported by the banking system. We also saw what happened to the cocoa output last year, which was as a result of, you know, climate development, and how that translates, you know, into the books of banks through the usual, you know, financial risk channels in terms of your credit risk and market risk. And the bank has issued another directive, a qualitative directive, on how banks should take an interest in the issues of risks associated with climate, ensure that the boards are well versed in the issues associated with that, and then to put in place the appropriate structures, you know, to ensure that you have the measures in place to mitigate those types of risk in your operations.
Thank you very much, Governor. Unfortunately,